Welcome, Freddy Freundlich, to the Dean Scene.
Thank you very much for having me.
I'm so excited to talk about this book, which everyone who's read it that I know agrees it's a real page-turner. So you tell us, who is this book written for? What kind of reader?
So that's an interesting question, Heather. It's been asked of me. And I basically believe it's written for parents, educators, and the truth is, anybody who was a child at one time or another.
At what point in your life was it clear to you that you didn't fit into the kind of life you were expected to lead? Like, when did you realize you were different from the typical kid?
I can't say exactly when, but I figure it was about in fifth grade when some of my antics were way out there. And someone who read the book would know what I'm talking about, specifically when I brought the dead squirrel to school for a science show and tell. Things like that was when I figured out that I was not your regular in the box kid.
Okay. And then an organization that you got involved in your youth was the JDL. Tell us a little bit about how you heard about JDL, how you got involved, and maintained a connection with JDL for many years.
Being an out of the box kid meant that the schools did not know what to do with me. I certainly was not a behavior problem, but I didn't fit into the norm. School to school didn't actually throw me out, but they always made it a suggestion to my parents that perhaps there was a better school out there who could help me. At one point, I was sent to actually a dormitory school where I met a kid, and he was also very much like me out of the box, and he was involved with the JDL, the Jewish Defense League. And he got me involved, and I found a calling there. I maintained this connection and relationship for several years because it was an affiliation. It was a family I really didn't have. And being part of this organization, I always felt like I was doing something good and just. I was doing something with my talents.
Right. And so JDL is the Jewish Defense League, as you say, and that was also and continues to be a rather out of the box organization as well. So tell us initially, what did that mean being a participant with JDL?
The JDL started in its infancy for one reason only, and that was to be a literal defense group for Jews. In other words, they would defend synagogues on Halloween night, where it was traditional to egg synagogues. They would patrol in certain areas where gangs of bullies were known to pick on Jews, especially little Jewish kids. And that was the beginning of JDL. It evolved into much more, protesting against Jews being kept in the Soviet Union. But when I first got involved, it was just that, just a defense league. And I felt like I was really doing something, helping my fellow Jews. Unfortunately, many of the Jews themselves, because JDL was out of the box, as you mentioned, didn't want to recognize the JDL, but they were always happy to see us when they themselves were in trouble and we came to their rescue. We basically took off where the police were not able, capable, or willing to do their job.
I hear. And a seemingly chance aspect that is instrumental to your success as being a participant in JDL was your size. You looked older than your actual age as a youngster. Even in your regular life outside JDL, you were often taken for older by people who didn't know you. So what were some of the benefits and challenges to being bigger and stronger? Like, you also, I think you had facial hair as a teenager. So just in general, looking older when you were a kid.
Yes, I definitely looked older. I had facial hair. In fact, for a bar mitzvah present, I was given an electric razor. And everything else in life, it was a double-edged sword. Obviously, at 13, didn't do it, but a little later on in my teenage years, when I wanted to go drinking at bars, and especially since I had friends who were of age, I was never carded. And it was quite funny because there were times when my 19-year-old friends were carded and the bouncer just let me in. Uh, one of the downsides was I remember going to a movie where if you were over 16, you had to pay as an adult and they wouldn't believe I was a child. Okay. Um,
I,
and then, of course, when I was illegally driving, nobody looked at me askance. People thought, oh, he looks old enough to drive. So I was never stopped by the police because I looked strange or funny. I would go through toll booths and nobody said, hey, kid, what are you driving the car? So it had its ups and downs.
right. Now, one of the, I'm not going to call it people, but one of the characters, let's say, that we're introduced to early in the book and throughout the book is the man. So
Right.
this is not somebody who is a person. Who or what is the man?
Okay, so first of all, the man can actually be a man or woman. To me, the man, as a child, and even to this day, it represents authority, the know all, the experts. Today, as an adult, we have to listen to any news channel, read any newspapers, and there are all those experts who are telling you what's going to be in 2 years. The world will come to an end. COVID is the disease that's going to destroy the world. War is going to happen. These are all the experts. But for me as a child, they were pretty much every adult, especially my parents and teachers, because the man controls a child. Now, theoretically, the man controls everybody, but as a child, you're very much aware of the lack of freedom you have because at the end of the day, the man's going to tell you what either what you need to do or what you should be doing. And if you don't, you're going to get in trouble with the man. So I hope that explains what the man is.
Yes, yes. In fact, I do want to talk about your career, let's say, or your adventures in getting into trouble with the man. Kids do have a variety of reactions to getting caught, getting in trouble with the man, and over time, your own responses emotionally and how you appeared outwardly, your own responses to getting into trouble, sometimes really big trouble, that evolves over time. So, if you can explain to our listeners how you mentally processed as a kid, getting caught, getting in trouble over time, you're very expressive about this in the book. It's a really deep dive into your own processes. It's quite poignant, actually.
Okay, so first of all, I believe that it was all about survival. I really didn't think. So I didn't plan on getting into trouble, at least consciously, I didn't plan to getting in trouble. I didn't plan on getting arrested. I didn't plan on many of the things happening to me, but I didn't really think about it. My childhood was all about survival, about getting through today. And I did whatever I felt I needed to do to get through today. And the consequences be damned. And when there were consequences, and there were quite a bit, I dealt with it then. And I dealt with it sometimes by being scared, by even crying. And it may have been embarrassed at times, but I don't really remember as a child being embarrassed that much by the things I did, which got me into trouble. It was only as an adult when I was able to look back that I started being embarrassed. So the reactions were a delayed reaction, and much of what I did, I felt the guilt when I was already an adult.
Right. Now, I can imagine the listeners who have not read your book, they're probably wondering, what did this kid do to get into trouble? You did mention getting arrested, but before it reached that point, you did continually get into trouble. You were very concerned what your parents would think. I would often read, my dad's going to kill me, right? So, what is it that, as you say, your book's title is part of the title is that you were born on the right side of the tracks. So, what was going on that you were getting into trouble, and what sort of trouble are we talking about?
Okay, for somebody, you're right. It's very hard to grasp it if you didn't read the book. So I encourage everybody to read the book. But that being said, I believe now in retrospect, it wasn't just that I was out of the box. My parents were out of the box as well. They came from very different places themselves. And on the most part, they were positively out of the box. At the time, back in the 60s, when it was not something that was in the norm, my mother was a businesswoman. She owned her own stock brokerage company. So my parents were definitely out. So, yes, I grew up on the right side of the tracks in the classic home, but I started out with out of the box parents and I was immediately out of the box. Now, much of my childhood, and again, you'll find this in the book, I was not a behavior problem. I just was a dreamer. I was a Tom Sawyer, Huckleberry Finn kind of kid. I had a heck of an imagination. And through my childhood, I did things where maybe even today, where they understand children a little bit different, I wouldn't have gotten into trouble. It was just that the system had no place for anybody who was any different. At the same time, without being too egotistical, I was a very bright kid and I was bored with the education system. So I am a college graduate, but I literally failed every year. I am not exaggerating. Every year of my childhood, I failed. But how did I educate myself? I would sit in the back of the classroom and under my chair or under my table, I would read a book. I would play hooky and go to the public library. Now, for that, I was not a troublemaker, but I was not part of the system. They did not want me. I did not fit in. If you don't get A's and B's on your report card or even C's, then you're not a good kid. You don't belong in this school. I'd be proud to have a child like I was, but I'm a different person and it's a different time.
You did get into trouble and saw the inside of different kinds of institutions, low security, I don't know if it's higher security.
Both, actually.
Eventually, so the state of New Jersey, what did they do? Where they sent you somewhere? What did the state of New Jersey do when they
New Jersey, it started out, I went to, first of all, as a juvenile at the time, every place I went to was a juvenile facility. For short times, I was in what was called the Union County Detention Center, which is a regular high security jail for juveniles. Most of the time while I was in New Jersey, I went to a place which is a minimum security jail, but for kids. And then they sent me out to a private institution in Idaho, which was actually, it was private, but it was contracted by various states around the country. We had kids from all over who the states would farm out and they would pay the bills. And that would be classified as a medium security kiddie prison. So I got to see, you'd see them all.
Right. And up to this point, as I said at the outset, this book really is a page turner, but things really kick into high gear when you're sent to Idaho, when you're sent to that facility. Correct. My goodness. You also developed a plan of action for rising in the ranks during your incarceration in this youth prison program. And again, when you climbed your way back to the top after a self-inflicted fallen status, we'll say, just tell us about what motivated you to play by the rules within that system, within the detention system, to play by the rules as a way of climbing out of rock bottom within the system.
It was a number of things. First of all, I guess I go back to the survival. I was a smart kid, and it seemed again, I don't recall thinking about this consciously, but looking back, I looked at the system. And while most of the kids rebelled against the system and got into trouble, they got nowhere. In other words, I looked at what were the various actions I could take. And it seemed the smart way to go was to work with the system, play the system. And I was a survivor. And I also always been a great salesman. My mouth is one of my greatest assets. And again, because I came from the middle class, upper middle class background, and because I read a lot, I heard a study once about people who read fiction turn into be great salespeople. And ain't a fiction. I can tell you that I pretty much read every children's series from Hardy Boys to Nancy Drew to Cherry Ames the nurse. I read them all. And I think all that turned me into the kind of person that was able to communicate and develop relationships with all types of people and of all ages. And it is quite remarkable that when you think about taking a kid from New York, New Jersey, grew up in an Orthodox Jewish home, going to a place like Idaho, where many of the people never met a Jew in their life, let alone an Orthodox Jew. The socioeconomic level of most of my fellow inmates were way below me. The education there was pathetic. And I ended up being a teacher's aide, helping the teachers teach. And I'm a kid who had no education, none at all. Okay. And even today, I lack in certain fundamentals because I was never taught it. For instance, I have a hard time when I'm writing script, capital letters. I have to remind myself, how does the S go? Okay. How does the capital J go? Because these are things I was never taught. So I
I
hope that
hear.
answers your question.
You know what else you weren't taught that really inspired me was how you were a self-starter. So when you were in the facility in Idaho, do you remember writing these requests? This
Right.
is a very interesting and inspiring, yet another inspiring part of the book for people that are timid about making requests. And you would challenge yourself based on actual requests that you wanted to see fulfilled, but you would sometimes think out loud as the book's narrative goes on that this one is not going to get granted, but you were surprised more often than not that requests were granted. So whether salespeople that are listening to this interview or do anything, a family person or just a citizen in the world, tell us about that inner work, that inner experience you had in making requests, doing the ask.
My wife, I'll give credit to, she's phrased this great. She always says, you don't ask, you don't get. Now, I didn't know my wife back then. I never heard that. But for some reason, I felt that they can only say no. Okay. They can only say no. And B, I thought, even if I ask for something which is way out, maybe it'll help me get something which is not so way out. But if I ask for that first, they wouldn't get it. But as a message to your audience, Heather, I would say that this is a big challenge that most people have. They're just afraid to ask. And the answer is always no if you don't ask. It's always
Sure.
no. So what have you got to lose? It's just a fear. And it's a fear that most of us are ingrained in when we're children because we are really taught as a child, don't ask. I will tell you what you need or what you get or what you want. And unfortunately, many parents, and most parents mean very well. The problem with parents are that they were children and they had parents, and it's a vicious cycle. And
Right.
thank God there are parents who change their cycle. And that's how things get better. Many times, this is what we run into, and people are just afraid to do that.
I hear. Fantastic. By the end of your book, you write from the perspective of the modern day version of yourself, from the standpoint of having emerged from your fraught youth, and you have a lot to say to readers who experienced disciplinary challenges and the correctional system, and in other ways who have grown up out of the box. You dedicate several pages in sharing your message of strength and hope. And I'm wondering, how has this become a passion of yours, emboldening disenfranchised younger people?
I've been on a long journey. And I should say we all have our journeys, but I've been on a conscious journey for many years to work with myself. One of the things I say, I believe it's on the back of the book, is that we are all dealt a hand of cards, which we have no control over, but we do control how we play the hand. Part of the challenge is most of us, I've never been taught how to play the game. Now, I believe that there are many adults out there who are carrying a lot of guilt around, as I did. And I feel that part of my mission on this earth is to help as many of them as possible, hopefully at a much younger age that I was when I realized it wasn't my fault. But again, it's not just about the adults carrying around the guilt as they were from things they did as a child. What about us as parents? See, I'm a parent and a grandparent. Do I have guilt from the way I raised my kids? Yes, sometimes I do, but I've learned to live with that too and realize that I love my kids truly. And whatever I did, which may have been wrong, I certainly didn't mean to. And it was only because these are the cards I was dealt. In fact, I will add one other thing, Heather. My relationship improved immensely with some of my children after they read the book. Because when they saw it in black and white where I came from, it was much easier for them to say, oh, this is where he came from. And as I get older, for instance, very quickly, I will say, with my parents, in the book, I talk about a lot of stuff, but I don't hate my parents. I forgive them for everything they did. I don't forget, but I forgive because I realized they loved me. These were the tools they had, and they did what they thought was best. I thankfully have changed part of the cycle. I believe I'm a different parent than my parents were. But I think a lot of parents also carry around a lot of guilt. I see this also with divorced people. A lot of times, divorced people have children. They carry around guilt or they'll blame their spouse for something to do with the children as if there's somebody to blame. Sometimes there's just nobody to blame. It's just life, and we have to move on from there. And I think at the end of the day, the biggest challenge that people face is guilt they're carrying around that most of the people don't even know why they're angry. But it all goes back to those early years. I was blessed in a way that I had things that stood out so much that's much easier for me to look back at it.
I hear. Brilliant. A couple of minutes ago, you mentioned your mission here on Earth. What is your mission with the book, Born on the Right Side of the Tracks?
Again, I don't have a clear mission. I wrote this book for two reasons. First and foremost, it was therapeutic. It was a story I had to get out because up until I wrote the book, I was walking around with a lot of guilt. Nobody knew my entire story. Nobody. My siblings didn't even know my entire story. Nobody knew my entire story. And obviously, there are things I didn't write in the book, but I was able to get things out. The second reason was, as I said, I wanted to help other people. Now, that's it. I don't know what my mission with the book is other than getting more people to read the book. And I will say this, as you said before, there's one person out of thousands of people who I know who have read the book. And I get sometimes emails from people I've never met who've read this book. Only one person had something bad to say about it. Everybody who reads this book gets something out of it, whether it's a parent, a child, somebody who's gone through something. It just wakes up something. And the other thing, I say, yes, it is a page turner. I had a friend who bought the book and she said, I wasn't going to read the book because I was in the middle of another book. I thought I'd just pick it up and start thumbing through it. And she said, I never put it down. I believe it's a good book. But more important, I believe people will get something out of it.
Fantastic. These days, you are a trainer and a motivational speaker. How do people get in touch with you to follow up?
Very simple. It's rabbifreddy.com. Freddy is spelled Freddy, rabbifreddy.com. And the book itself is available on all the major booksellers, Amazon, all the ones, but certainly on Amazon. And that's the best way.
By going to rabbifreddy.com also?
Yes.
Excellent. I do think it's a worthwhile read. This was definitely a worthwhile conversation, and I so appreciate you spending the time to speak with me. Freddy Freundlich, I wish you best of luck and more sales of this incredible book, and thank you so much for spending some time with me on The Dean Scene.
Thank you.